Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 55. Chapter 55. The day after the review, Boris, in his best uniform and with his comrade Berg's best wishes for success, rode to Omsk to see Bolkonsky, wishing to profit by his friendliness and obtain for himself the best post he could, preferably that of adjutant to some important personage, a position in the army which seemed to him most attractive. It's all very well for Rostov, whose father sends him 10,000 rubles at a time, to talk about not wishing to cringe to anybody and not be anyone's lackey. But I, who have nothing but my brains, have to make a career and must not miss opportunities, but must avail myself of them, he reflected. He did not find Prince Andrew at Omsk that day, but the appearance of the town where the headquarters and the diplomatic corps were stationed and the two emperors were living with their suites, households, and courts only strengthened his desire to belong to that higher world. He knew no one, and despite his smart guardsman's uniform, all these exalted personages, passing in the streets in their elegant carriages with their plumes, ribbons, and medals, both courtiers and military men, seemed so immeasurably above him, an insignificant officer of the guards, that they not only did not wish to, but simply could not, be aware of his existence. At the quarters of the commander-in-chief, Kutuzov, where he inquired for Bolkonsky, all the adjutants and even the orderlies looked at him as if they wished to impress on him that a great many officers like him were always coming there, and that everybody was heartily sick of them. In spite of this, or rather because of it, next day, November 15th, after dinner, he again went to Omsk, and entering the house occupied by Kutuzov, asked for Bolkonsky. Prince Andrew was in, and Boris was shown into a large hall, probably formerly used for dancing, but in which 5 beds now stood, and furniture of various kinds, a table, chairs, and a clavichord. One adjutant, nearest the door, was sitting at the table in a Persian dressing gown writing. Another, the red, stout Nesvitsky, lay on a bed with his arms under his head, laughing with an officer who had sat down beside him. A third was playing a Viennese waltz on the clavichord, while a fourth, lying on the clavichord, sang the tune. Bolkonsky was not there. None of these gentlemen changed his position on seeing Boris. The one who was writing and whom Boris addressed turned round crossly and told him Bolkonsky was on duty and that he should go through the door on the left into the reception room if he wished to see him. Boris thanked him and went to the reception room, where he found some 10 officers and generals. When he entered, Prince Andrew, his eyes drooping contemptuously, with that peculiar expression of polite weariness which plainly says, "If it were not my duty, I would not talk to you for a moment," was listening to an old Russian general with decorations, who stood very erect, almost on tiptoe, with a soldier's obsequious expression on his purple face, reporting something. "Very well, then, be so good as to wait," said Prince Andrew to the general, in Russian, speaking with the French intonation he affected when he wished to speak contemptuously, and noticing Boris, Prince Andrew, paying no more heed to the general, who ran after him imploring him to hear something more, nodded and turned to him with a cheerful smile. At that moment, Boris clearly realized what he had before surmised, that in the army, besides the subordination and discipline prescribed in the military code, which he and others knew in the regiment, there was another, more important subordination, which made this tight-laced, purple-faced general wait respectfully, while Captain Prince Andrew, for his own pleasure, chose to chat with Lieutenant Drubetskoy. More than ever was Boris resolved, to serve in future not according to the written code, but under this unwritten law. He felt now that merely by having been recommended to Prince Andrew, he had already risen above the general, who at the front had the power to annihilate him, a lieutenant of the guards. Prince Andrew came up to him and took his hand. "I'm very sorry you did not find me yesterday. I was fussing about with Germans all day. We went with Weyrother to survey the dispositions. When Germans start being accurate, there's no end to it." Boris smiled, as if he understood what Prince Andrew was alluding to as something generally known. But it was the first time he had heard Weyrother's name, or even the term dispositions. "Well, my dear fellow, so you still want to be an adjutant? I've been thinking about you." "Yes, I was thinking." For some reason, Boris could not help blushing. "I was thinking of asking the commander-in-chief. He has had a letter from Prince Kuragan about me. I only wanted to ask because I fear the guards won't be in action," he added, as if in apology. All right. We'll talk it over," replied Prince Andrew. "Only let me report this gentleman's business, and I shall be at your disposal." While Prince Andrew went to report about the purple-faced general, that gentleman, evidently not sharing Boris's conception of the advantages of the unwritten code of subordination, looked so fixedly at that presumptuous lieutenant who had prevented his finishing what he had to say to the adjutant that Boris felt uncomfortable. He turned away and waited impatiently for Prince Andrew's return from the commander-in-chief's room. "You see, my dear fellow, I have been thinking about you," said Prince Andrew when they had gone into the large room where the clavichord was. "It's no use your going to the commander-in-chief. He would say a lot of pleasant things, ask you to dinner. That would not be as bad as regards the unwritten code," thought Boris. "But nothing more would come of it. There will soon be a battalion of us aides-de-camp and adjutants. But this is what we'll do. I have a good friend, an adjutant general, and an excellent fellow, Prince Dolgorukov. And though you may not know it, the fact is now that Kutuzov with his staff and all of us count for nothing. Everything is now centered around the Emperor. So we will go to Dolgorukov. I have to go there anyhow, and I have already spoken to him about you. We shall see whether he cannot attach you to himself or find a place for you somewhere nearer the sun." Prince Andrew always became specially keen when he had to guide a young man and help him to worldly success. Under cover of obtaining help of this kind for another, which from pride he would never accept for himself, he kept in touch with the circle which confers success and which attracted him. He very readily took up Boris's cause and went with him to Dolgorukov. It was late in the evening when they entered the place at Omsk occupied by the emperors and their retinues. That same day a council of war had been held in which all the members of the Hofkriegsrath and both emperors took part. At that council, contrary to the views of the old generals, Kutuzov and Prince Schwarzenberg, it had been decided to advance immediately and give battle to Bonaparte. The council of war was just over when Prince Andrew, accompanied by Boris, arrived at the palace to find Dolgorukov. Everyone at headquarters was still under the spell of the day's council, at which the party of the young had triumphed. The voices of those who counseled delay and advised waiting for something else before advancing had been so completely silenced, and their arguments confuted by such conclusive evidence of the advantages of attacking, that what had been discussed at the council, the coming battle and the victory that would certainly result from it, no longer seemed to be in future, but in past. All the advantages were on our side. Our enormous forces, undoubtedly superior to Napoleon's, were concentrated in one place. The troops inspired by the Emperor's presence were eager for action. Their strategic position where the operations would take place was familiar in all its details to the Germans. A lucky accident had ordained that the Austrian army should maneuver the previous year on the very fields where the French had now to be fought. The adjacent locality was known and shown in every detail on the maps, and Bonaparte, evidently weakened, was undertaking nothing. Dolgorukov, one of the warmest advocates of an attack, had just returned from the council, tired and exhausted, but eager and proud of the victory that he had gained. Prince Andrew introduced his protégé, but Prince Dolgorukov, politely and firmly pressing his hand, said nothing to Boris, and evidently unable to suppress the thoughts which were uppermost in his mind at that moment, addressed Prince Andrew in French. "Ah, my dear fellow, what a battle we have gained! God grant that the one that will result from it will be victorious. However, dear fellow," he said abruptly and eagerly, I must confess to having been unjust to the Austrians, and especially Weyrother. What exactitude, what minuteness, what knowledge of the locality, what foresight for every eventuality, every possibility, even to the smallest detail! No, my dear fellow, no conditions better than our present ones could have been devised. This combination of Austrian precision and Russian valor, what more could be wished for? So the attack is definitely resolved on? Asked Bolkonsky. And do you know, my dear fellow, it seems to me that Bonaparte has decidedly lost bearings. You know that a letter was received from him today from the Emperor. Dolgorukov smiled significantly. Is that so? And what did he say? Inquired Bolkonsky. What can he say? Blah, 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 and so on, merely to gain time. I tell you, he was in our hands, that's certain. But what's most amusing, he continued with a sudden good-natured laugh, was that we could not think how to address the reply. It's not as counsel, and of course not as emperor. It seemed to me that we should be sending it to General Bonaparte. But between not recognizing him as emperor and calling him General Bonaparte, there is a difference, remarked Bolkonsky. That's just it, interrupted Dolgorukov, quickly laughing. You know Bilibin, he is a very clever fellow. He suggested him as addressing him as usurper and enemy of mankind. Dolgorukov laughed merrily. Only that, said Bolkonsky. All the same, it was Bilibin who found a suitable form for the address. He is a wise and clever fellow. What was it? To the head of the French government, said Dolgorukov, with great satisfaction. Good, wasn't it? Yeah, but he will dislike it extremely, said Bolkonsky. Oh yes, very much. My brother knows him. He's dined with him, the present emperor, more than once in Paris, and tells me he never met a more cunning or subtle diplomatist. You know, a combination of French adroitness and Italian play-acting. Do you know the tale about him and Count Markov? Count Markov was the only man who knew how to handle him. You know the story of the handkerchief? It's delightful. And the talkative Dolgorukov turned now to Boris, now to Prince Andrew, told how Bonaparte, wishing to test Markov, our ambassador, purposely dropped the handkerchief in front of him, and stood looking at Markov, probably expecting Markov to pick it up for him, and how Markov immediately dropped his own beside it, and picked it up without touching Bonaparte's. Delightful, said Bolkonsky. But I have come to you, Prince, as a petitioner on behalf of this young man. You see, but before Prince Andrew could finish, an aide-de-camp came in to summon Dolgorukov to the Emperor. Oh, what a nuisance, said Dolgorukov, getting up hurriedly and pressing the hands of Prince Andrew and Boris. You know I should be very glad to do all in my power for both of you and for this dear young man. Again he pressed the hand of the latter with an expression of good-natured, sincere, and animated levity. But you see, another time. Boris was excited by the thought of being so close to the higher powers as he felt himself to be at that moment. He was conscious that he was in contact with the springs that set forth in motion the enormous movements of the mass of which in his regiment he felt himself a tiny, obedient, and insignificant atom. They followed Prince Dolgorukov into the corridor and met, coming out of the door of the Emperor's room by which Dolgorukov had entered, a short man in civilian clothes, with a clever face and sharply projecting jaw, which, without spoiling his face, gave him a peculiar vivacity and shiftiness of expression. This short man nodded to Dolgorukov as to an intimate friend, and stared at Prince Andrew with cool intensity, walking straight towards him, and evidently expecting him to bow or to step out of his way. Prince Andrew did neither. A look of animosity appeared on his face, and the other turned away and went down the side of the corridor. Who is that? Asked Boris. He is one of the most remarkable, but to me most unpleasant of men, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prince Adam Karsatsky. It is such men as he who decide the fate of nations, added Bolkonsky with a sigh he could not suppress as they passed out of the palace. Next day, the army began its campaign, and up to the very battle of Austerlitz, Boris was unable to see either Prince Andrew or Dolgorukov again, and remained for a while in the Ismailov regiment. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 55 of War and Peace. Here's my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 55. Social Insecurity. Gatsby's green light, that covetous fluorescence, shines brightly through time. It may not be perceptible to the naked eye, but its destabilizing glow was felt on the road to Omsk in today's chapter. Boris is the first to feel it. He rides to Omsk in search of Prince Andrew Bolkonsky with the desire to become an adjutant to some important person. It does not matter who. All that matters is that he advance in his military career. He simply cannot endure the social inferiority and the concomitant anguish in his current rank. Comparing himself to others, he finds himself wanting. The same can be said of the old general who enters the chapter along with Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew, seeing Boris waiting for him, interrupts his conversation with the old general and makes straight for Boris. This provokes a look of silent contempt from the old general. Just as the youthful Boris triumphs over the old general, the youth party of the War Council triumphs over their elders in securing orders for an immediate attack on Napoleon. The elders want to take a wait-and-see approach, but the youth win the day. There'll be an attack. We're not offered any insight into the minds of the vanquished elders, but we do see that Dokharov, a representative of the youth faction, is fairly gleeful over their victory. It may be safe to surmise that his opponents in the War Council feel the opposite. All around us today, borne back ceaselessly into the past of stark social inequality, glimmers the dim gleam of Gatsby's envious green light. There's a lot of frustration and angst in today's chapter because of this. All of it is the result of characters comparing themselves unfavorably to others. This is a dangerous and, unfortunately, all too common practice. It breeds jealousy, insecurity, and great mental agitation. Better for us to turn away from the green light. Daily Meditation. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only to what he does himself, that it may be just and pure. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. Alright, thanks for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are below in the show notes. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow, we'll be reading and reflecting on Chapter 56 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.